Yo, what's going on, CZN fam? I'm Sue, and welcome back to another How to Play guide for Chaos Zero Nightmare. This one will be on everyone's favorite sexy yet somehow complicated cat girl, Rita. As with all of my How to Play guides, I'll give you a brief overview of how the character works before we break down the best Epiphany, memory fragment, teammate, and partner choices. Before we get into it, as always, hit that like and subscribe if you're not already. And without any further ado, let's jump into the video. Rita is a combatant of the Psionic class who specializes in dealing high damage with very high AP cost cards. And while this description also applies to some other combatants such as 9, Rita is far less straightforward. With proper sequencing, however, you could very easily play upwards of 10 AP with this character every single turn. The keys to success for Rita are as follows. Step 1, play cards to generate Chronicle. Step 2, convert Chronicle into Chronal Ascension, and Step 3, use Chronal Ascension to play high cost cards for damage and to generate additional Chronicle. Rinse and repeat. After hearing that though, your next question is probably going to be, what the heck is Chronicle and Chronal Ascension? Well, those would be the two key mechanics for this character. Let's start by talking about Chronicle first. Chronicle is a stacking buff that you could hold up to 6 of at a time and is denoted by this number here on the left, next to Rita's portrait in-game. Inherently, Chronicle doesn't do anything, and all of your stacks are converted into Chronal Ascension at the start of each turn. Chronal Ascension, shown here as the right number near Rita's portrait, is another stacking buff that acts as replacement AP for Rita's basic and unique cards. Think of Ascension kind of like an extra pocket of AP that you have access to every single turn, but only Rita can take advantage of it with cards that are found in her starting deck. As you recall, Chronicle stacks up to 6 times and is converted into Ascension at the start of each turn. This means if you can consistently generate 6 Chronicle every single turn, you will have access to potentially 9 AP each hand, assuming that Rita has cards to play. 9 AP each turn can very easily create some crazy combos, but only if you can consistently generate the appropriate resources. Let's talk about how to do that now. This is Neko-Arc. It is the key card for Rita, much in the same way that Hunting Instincts is for Hugo or Firing Preparation for Veronica. This 1 cost upgrade grants you 1 Chronicle stack for each AP cost of a card you activate. Note that it isn't how much AP you spend on the card, just the total amount of AP activated. Take for example 9's Fighting Spirit, a 1 cost skill that plays the highest cost card of 9's in hand without paying its cost. If the highest cost card in your hand is Hue, a 3 cost attack, when activating Fighting Spirit, you will generate 4 stacks of Chronicle despite having only paid 1 AP for the card. Knowing how to cheat AP cost to get the maximum amount of Chronicle stacks is key to maximizing the number of cards Rita can play every single turn. At the beginning of your turn, if you have no Ascension, you want to prioritize playing other allies' cards first in order to generate up your Chronicle stacks. Once they're full, you want to use Time Paradox, a 0 cost skill to convert all of your stacks immediately into Ascension. Once you have your Ascension stacks, this is when you want to play all of your Rita cards out from your hand. If you started your turn with Ascension stacks, however, the opposite will be true. You want to run out all of Rita's cards first, as you can't get Chronicle while in possession of Ascension. Once all of her pocketed AP has been spent, you're free to use your other allies' cards to generate Chronicle again to set up for next turn. A simple way to think about how to play this character is to look at the display next to Rita's portrait. If the right number is lit up, you want to play Rita's cards first. If the left number is lit up, or if both numbers are 0, you want to play non-Rita cards instead. Now that we've thoroughly broken down Rita's core mechanics, let's take a look at the rest of her starting deck. Rita's deck comes with 2 copies of Time Acceleration, which is an incredibly jarring basic attack. It is by far the hardest hitting basic attack as of the recording of this video, but it costs a whopping 3 AP. This is one of the fastest ways to quickly build up Chronicle as well as spend Ascension stacks, making it actually quite useful in Chaos runs, at least until later on. Most decks will eventually remove this card, but I'd recommend holding off on doing so until your deck is situated. Early on in Chaos runs, if you ditch your basic attacks too early before acquiring your other high cost attack cards from her deck, Rita is going to feel pretty miserable to play. The only deck I think that actively wants them is one that is pursuing a basic attack focused build, which we'll talk about more in the Epiphany section. Rita's basic heal, Rewind, is pretty much pointless, so you can absolutely get rid of it. Our first non-basic, non-setup related card to talk about is Time Axis Collapse. This is a 2-cost attack whose damage increases by 20% for each 1 AP cost of cards in your hand when you activate it. Collapse is actually an amazing offensive tool, capable of putting up lots of damage at the start of Ascension turns, or just generally peppering in free damage here or there thanks to certain Epiphany options. It can be the core card of your offense for Rita, or a solid role player if you want it to be. I found that most builds want at least 2 copies of Time Axis Collapse, and dedicated builds can play 3 or possibly even 4 copies. After Time Axis Collapse, we come to Future Decreed, which is one of the weirder cards in the game. Let's just leave it at that. It's a 1-cost skill that increases the cost of a random 2 or less cost card in your hand by 1. Note that's increase, not decrease. After the increase, it tries to play a random card from your hand that costs exactly 3. The idea here is to try to set it up so that after playing Future Decreed, there is exactly 1 card in your hand that costs 3, and by playing this, you're guaranteed to activate it. To do this, you basically want to have your hand full of only 1 or less cards in hand and at least 1 3-cost card when you activate it. Alternatively, you want to empty your hand of all of your 1 or less cost cards and then play this when there's only 2 or higher cost cards in your hand. Future Decreed can be very powerful when you understand how to set it up correctly, but unless you build your entire team around it with, say, combatants like 9, it's really not that great. I find that most general use builds don't necessarily need it, so if you're not going to use it, you can cut it. The last unique card in Rita's deck is Chrono Circle. This 1-cost skill creates 2 Fate Imprints in your hand, which are very tricky cards to use. Fate Imprint is a 2-cost attack with both Exhaust and Retain. It deals 120% damage for each AP cost of the card when you activate it, after which it increases the cost of all cards in your hand named Fate Imprint by 1. So since you make 2 of them at a time, the first will cost 2, and then the second one will end up costing 3 thanks to the cost increase. If you copy this card and generate several of them, then the third would cost 4, the fourth would cost 5, and so on and so forth. This means that it is possible to have versions of Fate Imprint in your hand that can cost 9 AP if you retain them in your hand and keep playing other versions of it. As a failsafe to stop you from being stuck with a bunch of cards that you can't play, if you ever discard a Fate Imprint from your hand, the cost will change back to 2. This makes playing her with combatants that have discard abilities such as Nia a decent option when playing her around a Fate Imprint based build. Rita's ego skill is Hour of Glory. For 5 ego points, it gives you 6 stacks of Ascension and also increases the damage amount of the next attack you play of Rita's by 10% for each AP cost of all cards in your hand. So for example, if you have 10 AP worth of cards in hand, Hour of Glory will give you a 100% damage pump up to a maximum of 200% if you had, say, 20 AP in hand. The damage amp on this ego skill is certainly nice, but the main reason that you're activating is that 6 Ascension. It's basically an emergency button you use to get 6 AP if your hand is filled with Rita cards that you can't play. When used correctly, you can get some truly explosive turns that put up tens of thousands of damage. That said, it's not my favorite ego skill, but it's certainly a good one if you have the right hand for it. Before we move on to the Epiphany Choices, let's recap Rita's game plan. Step 1, play Chrono-Arc to start gaining Chronicle by using AP. Step 2, convert Chronicle to Ascension at the start of your turn, or by using Time Paradox mid-turn once you acquire it. And then finally, Step 3, use Chrono Ascension to play out Time Axis Collapse or Fate Imprint for big damage and to run out your stacks. Rita may seem complicated on paper, but I promise you with practice, she's fairly simple. Remember, play Rita's cards first if this number here on the right is higher than 1. Otherwise, play non-Rita cards to generate Chronicle after you've used Chrono-Arc. Before we move on to Epiphany for this character, I want to take some time to give you all a quick heads up. Rita requires a lot more from you than a normal combatant would when it comes to deck building, since many of her Epiphany choices require specific combatants or specific cards be in your deck in order to be effective. As such, the character will oftentimes feel cumbersome to play in the early stages of Chaos runs until everything comes together. Having a clear vision in mind of what you want to accomplish with Rita I find is very important, lest you find yourself with a deck that feels totally clunky and useless. For pointers on planning out how to make a deck, check out my deck building guide that I will link in this video's description. Throughout this section, I will also show you some example decks for specific epiphanies to try to guide you in the right direction. With that out of the way, let's move on to our first card choice, which is Chrono-Arc. Option 1 gives you 3 Chronicle whenever your Ascension stacks are decreased to 0. This is the best option for most players 95% of the time, as it nearly guarantees that you'll get that 9 AP turn as long as you're spending at least 6 AP every turn with Rita. This option, I have found, makes gameplay the smoothest for her, and it's the one that I'd recommend, but there are other alternatives that you can use, they just require specific team comps. Option 2 deals damage to a random enemy at the end of each turn if you have any leftover Ascension stacks. I'm not really a big fan of this one, as usually I want to be using up all of my Ascension stacks every single turn. The only time I've ever been left over with stacks is if I simply just didn't draw any Rita cards, and I'm not too keen on taking an Epiphany that only works when I'm getting bad hands. Options 3, 4, and 5 are all the same. You make 1 stack of Chronicle whenever a specific condition is satisfied. Option 3 gives you 1 Chronicle stack whenever a card is exhausted, making it great with characters like Tefera, Luke, or perhaps even 9. Option 4 gives you 1 Chronicle stack whenever you discard a card, making it great with Nia and perhaps possibly even Rinoa. I tried really hard to get this one to work during my testing for this guide, but it didn't come together as well as I would have liked. That said, I do think this is a very powerful Epiphany and might be good in the future when another unit that supports discard releases. Option 5 gives 1 Chronicle stack whenever a retain effect is triggered in your hand, making it great with characters like Beryl or Leia. This one is a bit tricky to get working, as the retain cards that Rita has herself don't really have the best synergy with it. One of her best cards does have retain, but leaves your hand after activating its retain effect. The other retain card can make hands clunky in multiples and feel very lacking with only 1 or 2 copies. I would only use this one if you're certain you can manage your stacks properly without your hand bricking and becoming totally useless. This is definitely the hardest one to use properly. To recap, Option 1 is your best most of the time, while 3, 4, and 5 all have specific niches for decks that want them. Next up is Time Axis Collapse. Option 1 is a stronger version of the base effect and is generally the best one for most decks. In conjunction with one of Chrono Circle's upgrades, it's possible to use 3 Time Axis Collapse every single turn for free with this Epiphany, which could easily put up well over 10,000 damage every single turn without breaking a sweat. A build like this doesn't have the highest ceiling, but it is incredibly consistent, powerful, and most importantly, beginner friendly. Option 2 reduces the cost to 1 and gives a damage increase for each 1 cost or lower card in your hand. This is surprisingly easy to trigger if you play her with characters like Tefera or, say, Veronica. The only issue with it is that it's based on the number of cards in hand, putting it at a hard cap of an additional 270% damage, whereas other options are based on the total cost, which can get quite a bit higher with the right setup. Option 3 gives you a gigantic boost to the next 3 attacks you play, and is best for decks that are trying to take advantage of Fate Imprints for gigantic damage. Definitely not a beginner-friendly card, as you'll need a whole team filled with AP generation with characters like Tefera and Mika in order to pull it off. Option 4 grants the card Retain, as well as 2 stacks of Vulnerable on use, but it does lose the additional damage multiplier. Instead, this card free plays whenever Ascension is gained, meaning that whenever you start your turn or activate Time Paradox while it's in your hand. While I do think that option 1 is stronger, you can't really go wrong with this one as well, since it's effectively a free source of damage and vulnerable. I like slapping 1 or 2 copies of this into my support-based Rita builds in order to generate some passive damage and utility. Option 5 changes the cost of all Fate Imprints in your hand to 4, which is meant as a failsafe in case you end up with too many Fate Imprints that cost 8 or more, like I did when testing for this video. Being able to consistently set all imprints in your hand to 4 will allow you to generate a lot of damage every time you cycle through your deck, especially for content like Great Rift. That said, it requires an obscene amount of AP to pull it off, meaning that you're only going to be using this one when paired with characters like Tefera, Mika, or some other AP generator. Definitely a Epiphany for the more experienced players out there. To recap, all options for Time Axis Collapse are viable, but option 1 is the best for most players most of the time. Now let's move on to Future Decreed, which is, in my opinion, the worst card on Rita. All of these Epiphany choices do have specific use cases, but unless your deck is tailor-made to use them, they can often be more harmful than good, so I'd advise cutting them. Option 1 is the base version of the card, except its cost is reduced to 0 instead of 1. Unless you're trying to trigger a 3-cost non-attack card, I think you're better off choosing option 2, which plays a random 3-cost attack from your hand. This is the safest option and the one that I'd advise using most of the time, especially if you can get a draw 1 Epiphany on it. At that point, it just effectively becomes a free draw 1 with the upside of playing a hard-hitting attack every once in a while, such as 9's Hue. Option 3 is a 3-cost skill that plays a random 3-cost card from your deck. This one is honestly really bad. I'd rather just play Spirit Kafox or Cassius's Joker to find the card in question that I want to play. Maybe this gets buffed in the future, and if it does, I'll make a note of it in a pinned comment down below. Option 4 plays 2 random 2-cost cards in your hand, which is actually a really solid rate. The problem is that there aren't many 2 costs that are worth playing as of the recording of this video. Time Axis Collapse already has free play combos, leaving you with only going for triggering low-cost Fate imprints from Rita's deck. Otherwise, you're just going to be jamming it with things like Magna's Glacial Iron Fist. Not a bad Epiphany, just not one that you're reaching for all of the time. Option 5 changes Future Decree into a unique upgrade for 3 AP that deals 300% damage to a random enemy whenever you play a card whose cost was increased manually. That means that you can't cheat the cost of the card to get the damage, so playing Fighting Spirit on 9 or using other versions of Future Decree does not work. It is a very powerful effect and one I think you might want in a deck built around Fate imprint spam, but again, that is not an easy deck to build or pilot, so I would steer clear of this one until you've got a lot of experience with Rita. To recap, Option 2 is the safest pick most of the time, but otherwise I'd just remove Future Decree from your deck unless you have a specific need for it. Our last Epiphany to discuss is Chrono Circle, which I like to think of as the playstyle defining one. Option 1 generates 3 copies of Fate imprint in your hand, which is the perfect amount for anyone who is just looking to generate pure offensive firepower. This is the safest option most of the time. Option 2 adds Retain to the base effect and creates 1 copy of Fate imprint in your hand whenever the card is retained. This is a great way for you to generate guaranteed offense every turn, but do be careful that you don't fill your hand with too many Fate imprints. As their cost increases, you might not be able to play them all and thus automatically lose since your hand will be full of cards you can't actually play. I personally don't mind running 1 or 2 copies of this in a deck that's already playing most of its cards for free each turn with Rita. Option 3 changes Chrono Circle into a 2-cost upgrade with Unique that moves all of your basic cards to your hand whenever you gain Ascension. This one is actually quite a lot of fun, in that it lets you basically spam your 3-cost basic attacks every turn without really having to spend any AP on it. And if you use Time Paradox, you get to do it again that same turn. It's not really meant to be a Mei Lin style basic attack DPS build where you one-shot enemies. Rather, it's more a package that you put into your Rita decks that doesn't really cost too many Fate memory points. The reorganize that's shown in the deck here is meant to represent whatever support card you want to play. Since Rita is a psionic class combatant, she has access to some incredible draw power and search tools, including monster cards like Spirit Kafox. I really enjoyed my time building decks around the basic attack version of this Epiphany, since it offered me a way to deal guaranteed damage while still building Rita as a support character. Option 4 selects 1 exhaust card in your hand, discard pile, or deck, and exhaust it to create Fate imprints equal to that card's cost. This one is a specialized Epiphany that's meant to make a whole mess of Fate imprints alongside of 2 AP generating characters such as Tefera and Mika in order to deal massive damage in a single turn. If you're not trying to combo a boss in something like Great Rift, I would stay far away from this one. Option 5 is a 3-cost unique upgrade that draws 3 attack cards that have a cost of exactly 2 whenever you gain Ascension. This one allows you to draw 3 copies of Time Axis Collapse every single turn for consistent damage and is the backbone of most of the general use decks that I'd recommend with Rita. To recap, Option 1 is great for a Fate imprint build, Option 3 is great for a support or basic attack build, and Option 5 is great for Time Axis Collapse based builds. Options 2 and 4 are specialized, and you should only use them if you know what you're doing. I think all 5 options, though, are viable. Now, let's move on to memory fragments. Originally, when Rita was first previewed, I thought that Beast Yearning would be the slam dunk, no-brainer option for this character's memory fragments. As time went on, though, I don't really think that way anymore. You can certainly play Beast Yearning with a 2-piece Executioner's toolset, but I would only do so if you're exclusively playing decks built around Time Imprint. Otherwise, you're better off playing Line of Justice 4-piece set with a 2-piece Executioner's toolset. This setup is going to generally give you the best performance across all of Rita's builds. If you don't have a Line of Justice set, or for whatever reason you just don't want to play it, then your next best option is going to be the tried and true 222 build. 2-piece Blackwing set, 2-piece Executioner's Tool set, and then a third 2-piece set of your choice. For main stats, you're going to want to go crit chance in the slot 4 ideal most of the time. If your gear is incredible though on a Line of Justice set, and you can get at least 45% crit rate, then it might be better to go crit damage main stat in this slot. For slot 5, Desire, Justice damage percentage is the way to go, definitely not attack percentage for reasons that we'll talk about in a second. And for Imagination slot 6, its attack percentage is the main stat. For substats, you're chasing crit chance, crit damage, attack percentage, and flat attack whenever possible. That last one is really important also, as Rita has an additive plus 10% passive damage increase that triggers once she gets over 800 attack. The problem is that Psionic doesn't have the greatest base stats, so hitting that is going to be really hard without the 2-piece Blackwing set. That said, it is not worth giving up the crit chance from the 4-piece Line of Justice set, nor the crit damage from the Executioner's Tool set. And it's certainly not worth giving up the Justice damage percentage slot 5 just to get that plus 10% attack. You will eventually get there with good enough gear and a high enough ascension level if you really want it. So don't completely botch your gear sets just because you want to chase that passive. Now, let's talk about teammates. I find that Rita is fairly self-sufficient and slots in with most team compositions, but there are definitely some standouts here, especially when you consider certain Epiphany choices. For Vanguards, Rita feels like she was tailor-made to work with 9 in a lot of scenarios, so that's a no-brainer if you have her. As for alternatives, Magna as always feels super solid, and Rita with Calliope is incredible thanks to all of the high-cost cards in Rita's kit that can activate Calliope's Celestial cards. For supports, Tefera feels like the best in slot option, but there are other great ones out there as well. Nia is great if you want draw power, a way to mitigate the drawbacks of Fate Impulses, and also use the discard variant of Chrono-Archon. Mika has been invaluable in generating high AP counts to be able to spam out some of Rita's more expensive builds, and Ray has been phenomenal in testing when using the basic attack builds with Rita. She can elevate the damage of basic attacks pretty reliably, while also providing healing and card draw for the team. As usual, Veronica and Orlea can work here as well, as they do with most of the cast. For accompanying DPS, I really like Beryl as well as Chizuru. Beryl's combination of consistent damage, high cost cards to supply Chronicle with, and draw power worked excellent with Rita. Chizuru's basic attack spam build in tandem with Rita and Ray was probably my favorite team to play while testing for this video. Thank you to that one person in chat who put me onto this team. You already know who you are. It was an absolute blast to play and I cannot recommend it enough. Finally, to wrap up the video, partners. The best in slot option is unsurprisingly Ivy, the featured 5-star partner alongside of Rita. If all you care about is damage, Ivy is the go-to choice, especially if you are playing the Fate Imprint based builds. But that's really all there is to Ivy. Damage and nothing more. She doesn't really offer you anything unique or special, just that her numbers are going to end up being the highest. If you want to save some resources, you could just use Eloise and be content with that. If anything though, Psionic really needs better partners because on paper, none of these are really that impressive. Each of them have a pretty lackluster active. In the future, it wouldn't surprise me if there ended up being a better partner option for Rita. And if that happens, make sure to check for a pinned comment down below. And that's going to do it for how to play Rita. If I missed anything or just made any mistakes, let me know down in the comments section below. And if you want to see more how to play guides in the same style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. If you like what I do and want to help support me, remember to hit that like and subscribe button or check out the Patreon for just $2 a month, link down in the video's description. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later now.